Everybody, welcome. This is episode 25 of my podcast, and today I welcome Tom Slater, who is architect and founding director of T2S Architecture, a London-based practice. Tom, welcome. I've got a bit of an intro spiel for you that I've read to lead you
Sure.
in, if I may. This is your
Okay, of
company,
course.
if I'm correct. Is this your company ethos to kickstart everything?
I hope
Um,
so.
T2S Architecture delivers high quality commercial and residential modern architecture that responds to its context in a sympathetic manner and to embody the future of urban living. A great opening sentence. Tell us about that and the practice, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, yeah, I mean, that ethos actually does nicely and succinctly
Hmm.
express my sort of belief system on architecture, actually. I don't really like the architects who project their style of architecture on whatever site, as much as a lot of these are magnificent buildings and they're fantastic from an engineering perspective.
Yeah,
I often think, well, you're regurgitating something onto a site that perhaps was worthwhile in one area, but perhaps not on another. And that's not really what I tend to believe in. I like architecture that responds, and so it becomes something that's unique and
yeah,
something that's bespoke, because you say, well, this building couldn't exist anywhere else because it's truly responding to that context. And therefore, the amazing thing with architecture is that every site that we work on, all of them have their own challenges,
yeah,
particularly in urban locations, which is particularly what we're very passionate about as well. London, for example,
yeah,
you go to Google Earth and the complex nature of the street patterns.
yeah,
Every site has its own shape, its own geometry, its own site context, its own topography, its own sort of oddities. But it's all of those things that actually we love responding to because it makes something that's truly unique. And yeah, that's something that we're really passionate about.
that's it. And the reason I read your ethos is because many practices don't tend to actually have that. It shows the core foundation of your business, which is brilliant to work to.
Indeed. And it's something that it's actually you work at it, because I set T2S up 4 years ago,
Yes,
um,
yeah,
worked around the country and worked for different scale of companies.
mm,
But when I set the company up, it was all not necessarily done in a rush, but you have so many things that you have to deal with. I was a director of another company, so I had to agree the legality of doing that and the settlement and taking
yeah,
clients over and setting up your bank account and your telephone number.
yeah,
All of these things are real complex things when you're setting a company up.
absolutely.
And then at some point you have to say, okay, of course I'm an architect. So what drives me as an architect, and what type of architecture do I really like, and what type of architecture am I really good at? And so I think it's in those formative years when you set the company up that you start to really understand and build those passions. And you have to look within yourself. And I think from my perspective, living in London but not being from London, I kind of recognized that my energy levels would be driven when I'd get new sites in London, which are really complex infill sites, not necessarily huge sites, but little infill schemes. And I just realized this is the sort of stuff that I love.
Yeah,
And it's because it's the uniqueness of that site. So you do all your site analysis and you think, okay, there's a window there, there's this use here, there's a bus stop there you've got to consider. Is it close to a tube line? What's the sun path, for example? Is the main facade north facing? Is it? If it
yeah,
is, you really have to understand how that building's going to function,
yeah.
because you're not going to be able to rely on light from that specific point. And so that's when I started to think that's what I'm really passionate about. What I've just gone through there, and
Yeah.
how you then take all of those intricacies and those oddities of a site and start to still create something that is architecturally interesting. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. And the other stream of that is working within existing buildings, which goes beyond my architectural career, really, because
Mm.
when we were talking about doing this podcast, and I've obviously listened to some of the previous episodes, and you start to build a picture of architects and their path. And I think for me, it started when I was at school,
Yeah.
and I grew up in a place called Burton-on-Trent, which is in the Midlands. And
Yeah.
during the 80s and the 90s, it became deindustrialized. It's famous for it as a brewery town.
Yeah.
And you'd have a lot of Victorian, Edwardian buildings associated with the brewery that slowly but surely started to become vacant because the brewing industry started to leave Burton, and it's for various political reasons. And so I started to see these buildings that once really contributed to Burton slowly but surely started to decay, and they start to close up and board up. And all of a sudden, the community and the urban and everybody in that local area starts to disengage with the building. And I think it was obviously just that visual really stayed with me. And during my GCSE, I think it was graphics, my project was taking some old brewery mill buildings not too far from where I grew up and investigating how they could be re-envisaged and how they could be brought back to life.
Okay.
And it was only recently, as I say, since I set the company up, that I then thought, well, why is it that when I look through my career, I've worked on so many existing buildings? And then I realized it was there for me all along when I was 15, 16 years of age and when I was growing up. And of course, those are your formative years. That's when you start to sort of get a consciousness and start to build an understanding of yourself and what you're passionate about. And it was all there in my past, really. And so unsurprisingly, I moved, when I moved to Liverpool, practice I worked on and the projects that I remember all involve refurbishments of existing buildings. So I did university buildings, a listed terrace in the Georgian quarter of Liverpool. And then since I've moved to London, I've worked on the Grade 1 refurbishment of the Malaysian High Commission in Belgrave Square, Gloucester Avenue, which was a collection of industrial buildings in Primrose Hill. Worked on that. That's a project that in my career I really look to as something I'm really proud of, but also something that I've learned a lot from.
Yeah.
And the same, we did a scheme in Sullivan Road, which is this beautiful modern building, but was actually a 1960s awful office building, which we've all seen around the country, exposed concrete brids, infill windows, the sort of Corbusian 1960s type. But we were able to repurpose it into something that was actually architecturally really interesting. And so since I've set the company up, it's just natural that a lot of the larger or more interesting projects that we're working on in the company involves repurposing, extending, and re-envisioning existing buildings. So
you don't do it. You don't do any new build at all, is that right?
No, we do new build. No, we do new build because we can't avoid it. And it's not something that we'd want to avoid at all, because if there's an opportunity there to develop something that's better, then it's something. I think that actually that embodied carbon discussion, which is kind of not the contradiction, but the tension between those two things, is actually something that we don't explore enough, because it's often muted that the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. But I don't think that's going to always be the case, because it's subject to how long that building's going to exist for. But also that building's contribution to its local area. If you're talking about a huge site with a little tiny cottage on it, then if we want to build homes and if we want to increase density in cities, which is something that I think is a really good way to make cities more sustainable, then it only feels right that let's not sort of slavishly say that little tiny building should exist for the sake of it existing, when actually the redevelopment of that site from a long-term perspective could contribute something far greater. But it is that balance between the two. But on the whole, the answer is always, can we look to retain this building? And certainly that's something that we prioritise in this company. And it's something that we're really proud of. And it's something that, I just found really interesting when I set the company up, and I tried to understand what I was passionate about. And all I simply had to do was spend a bit of time looking at my own sort of life. And it's there. it's there on the plate, and I just find that really interesting.
So is your the majority or all of your work, is it all London based, or you, because you've been around the country, do you have work going on elsewhere in the UK or
Yes, no, we're looking at projects a little bit further afield in the UK as well.
okay.
So it's been muted a few projects in Paris. We've got a few
Yeah.
opportunities, hopefully in Dubai,
Okay.
um, and certainly yes. But at the minute, it's a lot of the schemes are London based.
Yeah.
But I would never look to limit myself to that,
Yeah.
because of course I've worked in Glasgow, I've worked in Liverpool, I've worked in Manchester.
Yeah.
I've done projects in the Midlands, and we've done a lot in the sort of home county areas as well in the
Yeah.
south of England. So I would never look to limit myself, but a lot of the projects that we're working on at the minute are London based. Yeah.
How do you, it's interesting for me, the listeners, to learn how you then potentially win work in the likes of Dubai. How does that, is that word of mouth, or is it just a connection you've got, or how does that come about?
It's connections,
Yeah.
and it's about sort of nurturing those connections for as long a period as time. And I'm still in contact with people in the construction industry from 10 to 15 years. So
Yeah.
I became an architect in 2009.
Yeah.
And so, okay, there might have been a few years after that I've lost contact with those people because I've moved to London, but
Yeah.
invariably my contact base is people that I've been working with for the last 10 to 15 years. And
Yeah.
it's just a case of nurturing those people and keeping in contact with them. And as is the case with friends as well,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
very
Absolutely.
similar thing. You just need
Yeah.
to keep those doors open.
Yeah.
And I think there's also certain people that you recognize are good to keep in contact with.
Yeah.
So this individual is somebody who, he's just one of those people that he's just very open-minded in his approach.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that he doesn't say no to anything. It's just, well, I could do this.
Okay.
He's a very positive person in his approach, and it's just that he is now looking to work in that Dubai model and that Dubai community, and thankfully, because I've nurtured that contact for such a long time and I've got
Yeah.
such a good reputation with him, that he'd be willing to sort of move that work onto me. So it's not something that I planned to do,
Yeah.
but I think it's about spotting the people that are that open-minded and are that have connections all over the world,
Yeah.
and to maybe prioritize those people, because that's the way that you hopefully expand your portfolio.
Assuming then, talking about Dubai still, assuming that would then be a new build project, I'm thinking, is that right?
It
Yeah.
would more
Yeah.
than likely be a new build from what he's talking about with me. It's a very exciting project. So
Yeah.
we've got everything crossed on that one, and we hope
Yeah.
to hear about that in the very near future. And it's a really exciting opportunity. But also what's interesting is that from a UK perspective,
Yeah.
how far-reaching the influences of UK.
Absolutely.
Even though, recent times, politics aside, perhaps we're a little bit down on ourselves as a country. But I think
Yeah.
when you look to places like that, you can spot that actually our influence and that soft power that we have is actually fantastic. So in Dubai, all of their regulations are effectively based on British regulations. So
Okay.
if you're an architect, and I think that again just roots British architects as one of the leading sort of professional forces in the world.
Yeah.
Because if you're learning your trade in the UK as an architect and have all that skill set, it means that you can then work all over the world. So recently, the RIB has agreed a transfer deal with both Australia and the US. So
Yeah.
if you're an architect in the UK, then you can both work to those different countries.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how the organisation and the regulatory framework of the UK is also so used and promoted all around the world. So
Yeah.
I think it does give you a sense of opportunity and pride, so to speak, that us Brits are still famed for all those things that we've been famed for a long time, and that is our organizational skills.
And quite rightly too. It's on the
100%.
yeah. I'm not saying I'm an ambassador of that, but I am Mr. Organised, and it's I take everything with a very regimented approach, and
Indeed.
it annoys me when people don't. Although I'm not an architect. I've worked in the world of architecture for nearly 30 years, and it's
Sure.
yeah, it's a fascinating industry, and
Yes.
you do need to have that regimented approach to everything that you do,
Hmm.
and
Of
clearly
course.
it's
Of
working very
course.
well for you. So with the going back to the practice, then you mentioned earlier you're 4 years old, is that right?
That's correct. So I was a director of another practice based in North London,
Yeah,
and then decided that I wanted to do my own thing. And
yeah,
thankfully, the guys that I was with were gracious and really positive, and really helped within that process, which really gave my company a solid footing. I've
yeah,
heard of other practices in the past where they've almost had to start again, so or
yeah,
start from a fresh start. I didn't really have to need to do that, and it was because I I was allowed to sort of take the clients over,
yeah,
um, and it's just meant that I had immediate client base. But I think that's been a real strength of mine in the fact that I can sort of take those clients and
yeah,
they've been willing to move across with me,
yeah,
and so I think that's a real sort of feather in our cap, so to speak. But it's also meant that immediately I set the company up 4 years ago, but almost straight away we were working on quite large scale commercial projects,
yeah,
um, and so it just made it made the because I didn't set the company up purely because I just wanted to run my own company.
yeah,
I know there are some people that want to do that, but that was really never my intention. I'm an ambitious person, but also I do want to work on exciting and architecturally interesting projects.
yeah,
Projects. I didn't want to just have my own projects for the sake of
yeah,
just
yeah,
being it mine, if you know what I mean.
yeah,
And so the fact that I was able to negotiate that and retain really large scale commercial projects and clients was something that I was really interested in doing. And so, yeah, so I've set the company up 4 years ago, and working on large scale commercial projects, new build, but also a lot of retention that we've talked about. It's been a rocky road, but there's five of us now in total, based in
okay,
sunny London Bridge. It's not always this sunny
no,
in in London Bridge,
yeah.
and we're still going strong, which is great.
And so you literally, it was just straight out the back of COVID then, really. So that was
Yes.
that's quite a brave
Yeah.
move as well. Yeah,
Yes, it was on the back of COVID and with a 4 month pregnant wife.
yeah,
So yeah, I was getting a
yeah,
few odd looks when I
yeah,
decided I was going to do it my own way.
yeah.
The COVID thing is actually really interesting because one of our first members of staff, who's still with us, joined when I had COVID,
Oh, okay.
and I didn't have an office. I was still working from home, but we had to facilitate this amazing project that we're engaged on. So
Yeah,
there's always this kind of awkward tipping point where you set the company up and you just want to get moving, and then the projects start coming through the doors. Is that okay? Hold on, I need to facilitate this now.
yeah,
And actually, it's probably not me sitting in my bedroom doing some drawings. It's actually I need staff,
yeah,
I need an office, and I need to really be ambitious in what I'm doing. But that process took 1 or 2 months. I set up in May,
yeah,
and we had an office in September. So it was quite a quick move from going from doing some drawings in my kitchen
yeah,
because I had to, because we had COVID,
yeah,
and then in September, the world opening back up, albeit our first Christmas do was cancelled because COVID then returned,
yeah,
and this would have been Christmas 2021. So the world opened, and it was great. That this is fantastic. And then there was the whole country had to close again for a few weeks
Yeah.
because of the reintroduction of the concerns with COVID. So I think we had a delayed Christmas due for March, I think the year after. So it is interesting looking back into, how COVID influenced it. But yeah, when my first member of staff, I handed her laptop over my garden gate because I didn't want to get
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
close
Yeah.
because I'd had COVID. And
It's
at the
weird
time
when you
I
think
was,
about it now. Really strange
yeah, and
times.
I was isolating in our spare bedroom
Yeah.
because obviously I didn't want to give my wife COVID
Yeah.
because she was pregnant,
Yeah. Yeah.
albeit
Yeah.
in the end she got COVID and everything was okay. So looking back on those COVID times, it's almost like a dystopian film, isn't it?
It really is.
You
Yeah.
can't quite believe that it all happened like that. But what it has done from a company perspective is we are quite flexible and agile, which I think helps.
Yeah.
So we do a day a week working from home, and the guys are working on flexible hours, and so I do think that setting up during that time when it COVID forced all industries really to confront remote working,
It definitely did. Yeah. It really
and
did.
the idea of holding a meeting on Microsoft Teams was unheard of,
Yeah.
um, until COVID forced everybody to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, actually, we don't do anything else.
I know.
Now, there is a slight movement in planning councils and certain in certain parts of the industry where they want us to start meeting again in person because it does allow you to interact with people in a slightly better way than it does remotely.
Yep.
But still, a lot of meetings take place on Team, and that is a byproduct from COVID. And I think our company is kind of honed within that, insofar as we've had to build in a sense of agility into
Yeah.
the way that the company works. And so, yeah, we allow the guys work from home one day a week, but we're in the office majority of times because it's quite a collaborative industry. So I
Yeah.
think that has to be the case. But I think being born in COVID has meant that flexibility and agility is built into the way that we work.
And talking planning out of interest, obviously, I'm talking to practice directors from all over the country, different planning authorities, different local authorities.
Sure.
How everybody has a slightly different answer on lead times. Some people complain it's taking me 18 months for a 3-bed extension that should be straightforward to this semi-detached house.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find planning in your area in central London as you are? Is it as
It's tough as
frustrating as
well.
others? Yeah,
It's frustrating, and I'm
huge
sure
lead
that,
times. Yeah,
but I'm sure that the planners would echo frustrations as well. So I don't think it's a one versus the other,
hmm.
but I do think it's a very frustrating process, and I think the frustration comes from the timescales and not
Yeah,
knowing, because what developers want is some sense um, of being able to project, because
yeah,
it's all based on finance. And so if they project a year in terms of getting planning and actually takes 3, that has a huge impact on their financial model, because that building may be vacant for 2 years and they didn't project for that, and all of a
yeah,
sudden they've got a huge problem. And so I think the time scales involved on planning is the biggest issue,
yeah,
in my humble
yeah.
opinion,
No, yeah, I agree.
because if you need some level of certainty on timescales,
Yeah,
and if developers aren't given those certainty on timescales, then it opens up so many different types of risk for them.
yeah,
And I think that the way the economy is moving, we need to be giving developers some help, because of all the sort of moving parts and moving sort of spinning plates that we're dealing with around the world. I think the most that we could do is at least give them some certainty on timescales. On, if a decision is going to be refused, then so be it. Refuse it within a certain amount of time. Don't take 2 years. You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah,
I think timescales from a planning perspective is the biggest issue I find, and the
yeah,
biggest frustration from my client's perspective.
yeah. No, interesting. So, just moving on. We've talked about some previous projects you're very proud of that you've worked on. What's on the drawing board now? Anything exciting to talk about and share?
Yeah, of course. We're working on a hotel
Okay.
in in Tooting, which is really exciting. We're working on, well, hopefully reinvigorating one of our older projects, which has been sort of delayed for quite a significant amount of time. So
Yep.
we're hopeful that one's going to. I have to keep it quite vague because sometimes with
Of
clients
course. Yeah.
they don't want things to be advertised, and of
Absolutely.
course,
Yeah.
in other instances, if schemes are in the planning process, then what I don't want to be doing is looking to sort of in any way discriminate that process. But
Yeah.
I mean, one in particular we're looking at in Streatham, which is one design wise I was really proud of. It was an existing building, beautiful. It was an old an old Burton's shop,
But, oh, right, okay. Yeah. Remember,
and
but yeah, I
yeah,
remember
so
dressing top to toe
Burton.
in, but
It was a Burton's menswear shop, and
yeah.
all of these buildings around the country had the same architect working on them, and all
Okay.
of the facades were detailed in a very similar way.
Yeah.
They all echoed the 1930s, the Roaring '30s New York Gatsby style of
Yeah.
architecture. So very Art Deco, but not the Miami white clean lined Art Deco.
Yeah.
The sort of more akin to brutalism and that New York lavish lifestyle and high society, that kind of styles, which was really interesting. So we were engaged on that to look as if we could repurpose the building in such a way. And it was an existing bar with, I think, a dance studio above. And the client wanted to perhaps explore, converting the upper portions into more residential use, and also seeing if we could remodel the
Okay.
building in some way. So that's
Yeah.
actually a really exciting one, by taking the detritus, because over years what's quite common in buildings actually is, if you have something that is architecturally quite interesting, but over the years little installations take place and it begins to dilute
Yeah.
that original quality. And so I think this was a really good example of that, where you had MEP ductwork, a staircase, windows infilled, and what would have been historically a beautiful building has over time become just a bit of a mishmash.
Yeah.
And so as part of that works, we said, okay, we can just take all of this detritus and MEP equipment off, try and simplify the form of the building, certainly to the rear.
Yep.
And then we explored a vertical extension of that existing building using a more sort of Art Deco style. And so that one's in the planning process at the minute, but we're actually really hopeful that that's going to be consented soon, literally in the next week or so.
Okay.
And I think that that one is one that's a really good example of our ethos to working with existing buildings.
Yeah.
Where you can, how can I put it? It's about understanding what the existing building is, and when as an architect you're working on developing that and reconfiguring it slightly,
Yeah.
you have to find what the existing building was and then respect that, and then everything that you do to change it,
Yeah.
if possible, is looking to reinstate what it currently was. So it's almost like you're acting as a bit of a historian. So you're trying to find images of what it was and get a picture of what you think that existing idea of it was, and then to try and reinstate that. So that it's almost as if you're reinstating it to what the building would have looked like initially, or what we think the building would have looked like initially. So it's almost like because normally with architecture, you want to put your influence on it. And there are instances where we've done that, where you take an existing building and perhaps the history of it wasn't perhaps as grand. And so it's more of a clean slate, if you will.
Yep.
And that you can go, okay, let's do something fantastic that's very sort of architecturally indulgent. But in some instances, if the history and the character of the building are so strong, I think our job is actually to reinstate that.
Yes.
And if it's been deteriorated over a certain amount of time, to reinstate that grandeur and actually use the stylings of the building as it is.
Yeah.
And almost, if you are going to extend the building, use the existing styling and doing it in such a way that it doesn't look odd. Do the extension in such a way that it actually looks like it was part of the initial building at its start. And so I always like think about there's lots of different ways in which you can extend existing buildings, but often you're using the drive of the existing thing itself.
Yeah.
And if it's something that's really historic, and is it something of real historic character? And if it is, then really the driving force should be to try and use that style and adapt the building in a sort of honest way, if that makes sense.
Well, clearly from the work that you've done, you've sent me a couple of your projects so far to feature and showcase, and your whole company ethos that we spoke about at the start of this chat is you are clearly abiding by that, and it's proving dividends. The work that you've done so far has been fantastic. The work that I've seen, and I'm sure the future projects that you have that you'll share with us will be equally as interesting. So
Fantastic.
no, yeah, good on you. And um, well, look, if we look to draw this to a close, it's been brilliant having you on. Everything we've spoken about in this last kind of half an hour or so has been fascinating, and all credit to you for having this company ethos that you stand by, and well done for the 4 years so far, and for many decades ahead.
Let's hope so.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Nick. Pleasure as always. Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.